Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Mark Leibovit, editor and publisher of the Leibovit VR newsletters, also known as VRTrader.com. He's speaking to us from Arizona. Welcome back to the show, Mark.
Glad to be here, and thanks for having me and present the work at VR Trader, which, by the way, I do have to present my little disclaimer up front. I'm not a financial advisor, nor do I provide financial advice, but for 43 years we've been providing educational, technical analysis and market forecasts here at VR Trader.
Are our listeners lucky enough to get another special offer?
They certainly are. Thanks for bringing it up. It's 2022 half off is the promo code. That's 2022 HALFOFF, just as it sounds. And when you go to VR Trader and pull up any of the newsletters and you go through the ordering process, there's a spot for the promo code, and that's where you enter 2022 half off, and that's exactly what it is, 50% off.
Mark, official numbers released by the U.S. government, the second quarter of negative growth. Does that mean the U.S. is in recession? The White House claims you're not.
You're right. I was just going to say that. The current administration, I'm giving them credit by even calling them that because they're incompetent, or maybe just very biased. You know, they're just socialists and they have their own agenda. For example, today they want to spend more money. Which has been the big problem. You know, you've got fiscal irresponsibility in Congress and the Senate as well, and the Fed, which is monetary policy, you know, is out there trying to balance it and deal with an adversary, so to speak. So it's really crazy. I mean, you know, government's not working together at all. If you got one group, one section spending like crazy, and the other trying to control inflation, how is that all going to work? And it's not. So that's one of the reasons I call about abolishing the Fed, because it's not really doing anything unless Congress and, you know, any of the legislative branches decide to stop spending and think intelligently. But to answer your question, yeah, technically we are in a recession. Politically, nobody wants to admit it. And if you own stocks and you're down 20% or 30%, or in some cases more than that, you certainly feel like you've been in some recession. But you know, the argument is everybody's working. You know, there's a lot of jobs out there, so things can't really be that bad. So there's all kinds of ways of interpreting it. You know, what's the expression? If your neighbor is out of work, it's a recession. But if you're out of work, it's a depression. You know, so that's sort of where we're at with the whole concept.
But this everyone working thing, one of our guests earlier today said, well, this is the setup that we had for the dot-com crash in 2000. Everyone was working, but there were warning signs all over the place that people conveniently ignored. Are people ignoring the warning signs?
Well, I don't know how to interpret that. I mean, the warning signs are it depends on what you're doing and what you're spending your money on. And, you know, I suppose if you're watching crude oil go through to the moon, I mean, that's sort of a sign that that's a tax on people, and that was a warning sign. You know, watching housing go crazy and breaking all kinds of rules, and 50 people trying to buy a property and they can't get a bid in accepted. I mean, I guess that's a warning sign. You know, watching war unfold in Europe, that's certainly a warning sign. You know, way before we start to see the gas prices take off, you know, we knew that something was going on when NATO wasn't cooperating with Putin, and he had his own agenda, and they have still their own agenda. And, you know, warning signs, you know, what's going on with China, which is serious, and they're becoming very aggressive in many ways. We can talk about all kinds of aspects, from Taiwan to the new moon potential of them, conquering the moon, so to speak. In fact, there's a story today. They just launched a big expansion to their space station around the planet. So, China is another aspect of it, and what's going on with Iran and Israel. These are all warning signs. I guess there are. It depends what you're doing about it. Now, let's say, for example, you're in the market and you're short the market, and the market drops 20-30%. You're a very happy camper, and you're making money. You know what I mean? So, are you in crude oil when it was running, from $50 a barrel to $120, and own some oil stocks, and like Warren Buffett owned particularly Occidental Petroleum and did very well. It depends what your perspective is, where you are in the world in terms of positioning yourself. But I guess the average person on the street, is watching agricultural prices go up and the grocery store bills going higher. And this is not only a function of supply chain issues and fertilizer, but also geocosmic issues on the planet. So, and these are forecasts. We've talked about this for a couple of years. So the warning signs were there, but how do you react to it, and what do we do now? That's really the question.
How can you believe anything out of the Fed's mouth? A year ago, they were saying this inflation thing was temporary and would disappear in a short time. Well, in the U.S., it's almost 10%. In Canada, almost 9%. And those are the official numbers, so it's much higher than that. Right.
Well, you know how I stand. In fact, I got this phone call the other day. I know it was a phony phone call, and somebody said, this is the Federal Reserve, and I'd like to talk to you. And I hung up on him. I knew it was a prank call. That was probably because, I don't know if it was a prank call or just one of these calls trying to get money from you. But anyway, I hung up on him. But I did tell him, hey, I don't believe this is the Federal Reserve, because I've been out there pretty much stating that Federal Reserve should be abolished.
Well, as friend of the show Bob Hoy has mentioned, being a market historian, there have been 18 recessions since the Federal Reserve was invented. And I guess if you have 2 quarters with negative growth in the U.S., we're into recession number 19.
They've been incompetent for over 110, is it 110 years? 109 years since it was created back in 1913. 8 or 9 good recessions. Even Ben Bernanke, the former Federal Reserve Chairman, came out and stated back during the financial crisis that yes, we caused it, and the Fed was partially, if not entirely, responsible for the depression, because I think they were raising interest rates during that period of time. I keep calling for the abolishment of the Federal Reserve, which is not going to happen. But there's that great book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which came out, I think, about 15 years ago. I posted on my website. You got to read it if you can read a 500-page document, but it talks about the creation of the Fed and all the shenanigans that's been going on, and basically the incompetence there. Economists have the worst record for predicting the market or predicting the future. You have an economic degree, you might as well just, flush it down the toilet. I mean, I took economic courses in my master's program, and they have no real productive, usefulness in the markets or the economy. It's like after the fact, and then, surprises like we've experienced the last two years or so come up, and they're scratching their heads. So they're trying to forecast. And then they also react, incorrectly, like Alan Greenspan did, and maybe Powell is doing the same thing now. When we'll find out, they slam on the brake and then they slam on the accelerator. And I used to compare Greenspan to a New York taxi cab driver for that reason, because they can't make up their mind what they should be doing and not doing. And now, what's the street doing, Jim? They're out there hoping that there were some signs yesterday in Powell's comments that maybe things don't have to be tightened so fast, or maybe we don't have to, or maybe the lights at the end of the tunnel, things are slowing, and we might even have to stop the increases or minimize the increases, or maybe even reverse our position the way Greenspan did back in that 1987 period, which was just ahead of the big crash, if you recall, way back then. So I don't know what the answer is. Alexander Hamilton had the good idea going back into the mid-1800s. I mean, he abolished the central bank, and he paid off the national debt. And even though it did come back quickly because the Civil War came in and so forth in the U.S., there was a moment in time where we got rid of the central bank and there was no debt.
In Canada, I think back in the 90s, with government cutbacks and pay freezes, we actually paid off the debt. And then, of course, they just started spending like crazy again. Do you think Jerome Powell will want to go down in history as the person who caused, A, the worst inflation in U.S. history, and then the worst recession in history as he tries to wrestle inflation to the ground?
I really don't know how history will interpret him. First, they were criticizing him for not acting quickly, but he really had he can't control the inflation. He's trying to control, the ability of, to deter people from spending, trying to bring down demand. And that doesn't change the supply issues. It doesn't change crop shortages or fertilizer issues. It doesn't change what Putin is doing or what the euro is doing or what the U.S. dollar is doing at any one particular moment or what China is doing or what the geocosmics are doing. I mean, the inflation, COVID, was he able to prevent COVID or stop future spreads of this virus in its various forms, which was probably one of the biggest triggers for this inflation? The U.S. government handing out checks to people during the COVID crisis, printing money like crazy. So I don't know how he could really be blamed because he had very little to do with it, and even if he acted earlier, as everybody says he should have, all these other factors he had no control over. So it's really a ridiculous comment. Yes, he can bring down some demand and scare people from spending money now, and maybe corporations, can't expand as much as they would like because of the increased cost of capital and so forth. But we all know that this is, out of his control. But everybody blames him, and sure, he could continue to slam on the brakes here, and there was talk about we're going to slam on the brakes to the point that we crash the stock market, and that's sort of our goal. I don't know if I believe all that. I think they're struggling to figure things out. They really don't know what they're doing to begin with. And the other part, as I mentioned a few moments ago, if the Congress and the the legislative branch of the government is spending like crazy in a fiscal level, what's the Fed supposed to do? You've got two branches of the government doing opposite things, fighting each other. So I don't think history would have any real it wouldn't be valid to blame him for this at all. That's my bottom line thought process here. He's just reacting, but he's reacting against forces he has no control over, only minimal control over.
We'll have more with Mark Leibovit right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Mark Leibovit. Crude prices have come down. Joseph Schachter, friend of the show, with his energy report, saying, expects demand for oil to slide as the U.S. gets deeper into the recession. But he said in the long term, oil might be a good investment. What's your position?
I share that view. Because production is not being increased. It's being discouraged. Companies don't want to spend money on refineries and new exploration and new drilling when they know the government is against them. Now, that may not be in other parts of the world, but here in the U.S., certainly that's the case. Then you've got, Biden going over to the Saudi prince and kissing his hand and probably whispering in his ear inside some secret room that, hey, you guys better start increasing production because the Republicans will come back into power in November if we don't get these oil prices down, and they'll start producing and put you guys here in Saudi Arabia out of business. So we might see some more influx of crude coming on board here for purely political manifestations, and then that'll drive crude oil down a little bit. So I actually recommended or suggested buying the inverse ETF for crude oil. Betting on some lower prices here for the reasons I just cited. But this is temporary, and if new production is not coming online, there's tremendous worldwide demand for crude oil, not just for gasoline purposes. It's used in so many other areas, including the creation of plastics and other materials. So over time, it's going to go back up again. And I mentioned a couple years ago, I think, on this show that I could see $300 a barrel or some incredible or even higher numbers in the years ahead if this pattern continues. And so, yeah, I would, on a sharp sell-off, particularly after the political nonsense is out of the way, it's probably a buy again, no question about it. They're never going to get the EVs produced the way they anticipate them, or the infrastructure to complete them and certainly fuel them, with the power situations we have around the world and here in the U.S., the EV stations. Where's the electricity going to come from? Germany's using coal now because they decided to get rid of their nuclear plants, so it takes about 10 years to get a nuclear plant underway. So eventually we're going to see it's straightened out, but it's going to be well beyond this 2030 deadline that the Democrats here in the U.S. are talking about, or perhaps that's the same deadline they're using in Europe. So, yeah, I'd be a buyer, but technically it looks like they're going to try to pull it back here a little bit for political reasons.
Mark, what I've really noticed is that there's no transition plan by any of these governments to go from fossil fuels to EVs and electrical power and generation. It's like overnight they want fossil fuel to stop, EVs to start. It took 100 years to phase the horse out.
Yeah, well, I used to have a few horses. I was using those up to a few years ago, sure.
Well, not 100 years, but let's see, automobile invented late 1800s. The Germans were still using horses extensively during World War II, so 45 years later. And people still remember horse-drawn milk wagons back in the 50s. So, come on. Come on, Jack. Well, I don't want to say that.
Well, mental illness is contagious, and there's an expression that Michael Savage came up with, who's a noted commentator, broadcaster here in the U.S. I think he was nominated to the Radio Broadcasting Hall of Fame, but he said liberalism is a mental disorder, and he had a book that came out with that over a decade ago. So, these people are not thinking clearly. They don't look at the facts. It's like a religion with them. And, unfortunately, when the lights go out and, there's big problems, they're going to, first they'll try to scramble for a solution, and then they'll blame everyone else for their mistake. Yes, it should be a slow, long-term process, and suddenly it became a political initiative, an emergency that it had to happen right away. And a lot of this is really based on the global warming theory, which is fallacious. And you can go back, into the geologic records and show periods of global warming when there was no humans around and no industrial production or anything else. And there are a lot of, scientific data supporting that. So this is all about making money, taking control of people. My great fear is just like we had, COVID restrictions, the way we have we had in the last couple of years, that they may try to pull a green global warming type restriction upon us, where they say, you got to go inside, you got to wear a mask, you got to cut back on whatever you're doing, and try to control people in another way, using this whole green energy and global warming nonsense as a way to just as a power play, so to speak. So it's like again, it gets down to money and politics more than reality. So that's sort of my rant on that subject.
Gold and silver, have they bottomed out yet?
On a trading basis, yes. A big picture, I couldn't tell you for the life of me if that's the case, because we hit a big double top in the gold, which I've been writing about from the high we had. I think it was about 2 years ago, and then we topped out, and it's on the chart. You can see the big double top formation, and there's an expression: when you see a double top, you sell a double top, and gold's been coming down ever since. And I've been writing about it, and now we got real oversold, and of course the dollar rallied, and that didn't help gold, because gold actually was holding its own for a while, even though the dollar was rallying, but suddenly it collapsed here. it's a manipulated market. We can spend hours going over data from GATA.org and all the nonsense that they discovered. Big firms like J.P. Morgan Chase were sued. There was criminal activity. They proved that there was manipulation there in the silver market. I mean, it's literally volumes of data supporting the manipulation of the market because they want to depress the price of gold. It makes government look bad. But you asked a short-term question. So short-term, we hit a little trading low. We're oversold. We're in a seasonal period where you normally get some type of bounce. The ultimate proof is going to, if you close above that 2070 high, and that's based in U.S. dollars, and stay above that for, I think, 3 or 4 days or some period of time. I think it's about 3 or 4 days technically. It's considered a valid breakout. And then we can start talking about 2,300, 2,400, some bigger numbers. So it's got a ways to go to get back above the high from the last couple of years to reassert a so-called bull market in the gold. Now, I'm not saying you should own some gold. The fear of government taking control and digitizing currencies and the risks of your money in the banks and the ability of the government to confiscate your money. So it's always good to be diversified, and whether it's real estate or whether it's, gold, as we're now discussing, that always makes some sense. But as a trader, yes, bullish here, and let's see how far it goes.
Mark, cryptocurrencies, are they on their way back up? I noticed Bitcoin up about $2,000 from its bottom a little while ago.
Well, I'm sort of crazy. I'm predicting 88,000 in Bitcoin, but it could take a couple years to get there. So, we had a big shakeout in 2019. It comes down, and it took a couple years for it to bottom and turn back up again. It's, all the nonsense politically, whether the government's going to control or not control. Everybody's waiting for this case with the Securities and Exchange Commission with regard to Ripple and the XRP crypto, whether it was a security or it was a commodity. Apparently the SEC thinks the Bitcoin is a commodity, so they're not going to bother going after that. But there's a lot of breaths being held regarding the XRP case with the SEC in the next few months. But the bottom line is I'm bullish. I think particularly Bitcoin, I think, has got a long way to go. I mean, not a long way, but back up again if you're really patient. And, I'm the view that you can't trust government. And most of the world is beginning to believe that. And, the alternate currency, which is a crypto, is the way to go. But the question, which one is going to survive? You want to go with Dogecoin, commonly known as Doggy Coin that Elon Musk was behind? Do you want to go with Ethereum, which is the basis for so many of the transactions and accounts? Do you want to go with Bitcoin? Do you want to go with XRP? I mean, there's literally thousands of them out there. So, maybe a fund that diversifies in several of them might be a way to be a player. But it's not going the way of the dodo. This is what many people are thinking, that it's just temporary. I think crisis around the world, war, which I still see as a big risk in Europe. I think you want to own some of it. So anyway, I'm a buyer, a little bit at a time, dollar cost average, and I'm not worried about it, but I'm not putting everything in it either,
Mark, thank you so much for chatting with us.
It's always fun. Thank you.
My guest has been Mark Leibovit, editor and publisher of the Leibovit VR newsletters, also known as vrtrader.com. If you have any questions for Mark or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.